Hello, Faith Ignited followers. One of the things that we want to talk about today is John 2. So, the Gospel of John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And we're going to look at the second chapter. Again, if you're not used to using a Bible, the chapters are the big numbers, the verses are the little numbers. So I'm going to invite you to look at John chapter 2 with me. And what I want to do today is we've had a lot of new Christians, a lot of young Christians, a lot of immature Christians who have come around the church and are saying, hey, how do I read the Bible? How do I get into the Bible? The other thing is we've had a lot of people who once were Christian or once grew up in a church that had lots of rules and lots of regulations and didn't focus on the relationship with Jesus much. And so I've been saying to a lot of them, like, you need to just get to know Jesus and study Jesus. Well, one of the things that I want to do is I want to show you that there's more in your scripture than what you're probably seeing. And so what I want to do is I want to invite you to read the scripture, but then remind you this is why we do church. This is why we watch the videos, is because if my car breaks down, I might be able to change the oil and I might be able to look at it. But the reality of it is I should take my car to a mechanic if I want it fixed. Why? Because the mechanic's been professionally trained. Okay. And so I want to invite you to read the Bible and get as much out of it as you can. But I also want to invite you to understand that there's more to the scripture than a peripheral reading. And then I want to invite you to understand that when I read the scripture and when philosophers and when doctors of biblical studies read the scripture, they're still getting more out of it every day. And so there's more than any of us can see. And so I just want to bring to you some of the highlights of John chapter 2. You ready? All right. So it starts out with Jesus going to a wedding. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, because if you're Jesus' original audience, and anytime you read the scripture, you got to go, how did the original audience read it and understand it? Which is one of the things that makes scripture reading challenging because none of us are in the original audience. And so we got to know some cultural things about the original audience. And the New Testament is really a big commentary on the Old Testament. So you got to know the Old Testament really well to fully grasp all the hidden things and themes in the New Testament. So the wedding is a big deal. Why? Because in the Bible, there's a theme that runs from the very beginning, literally in the second chapter of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, to the end in the book of Revelation. There's a wedding of a theme. And in the Old Testament, it is that Israel is the bride of God, and Israel sometimes behaves and absolutely adores her husband God. And then sometimes Israel actually commits adultery and flees from her husband God. And we have stories in Hosea where Hosea goes back and he buys his wife, and they're foreshadowings of Jesus' work on the cross, where Jesus becomes the price, right? Excuse me. He gives his life to buy back us, the church, on the cross. And we have the celebration, the culmination of the wedding in the book of Revelation. And here's how we track that. We track this all the way through the Bible. And so when we get to John chapter 2, as John is writing somewhere in the 70s and 80s AD, we get John writing about a wedding. And everybody should pause and go, wait, a wedding? This should be good. Why? Because John's audience would have understood the Old Testament and would have said, hey, there's some big theology pieces about a wedding. Now, the other piece of this that's really fascinating is that, remember I said that the wedding, the very first wedding, is in Genesis 2, when God does what? Right, when he creates Eve, and he unites Adam and Eve together, right? And the two shall become one, right? And a man shall leave. Right, you got it. All right. So what we do is we find in John chapter 2. Now, in fairness, the chapters weren't written. John didn't write in chapters. Moses didn't write Genesis in chapters. But what we see is at the very beginning of the Gospel of John, we go from a creation narrative into the wedding. What we see in Genesis is we go from a creation narrative into a wedding. John is reminding you that God is setting things right. He is in the business of redemption and restoring all things. So the readers of John's gospel, again, the original audience would have went, we just came out of the creation story. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Okay, all that's in John 1. And now we moved into a wedding, and everybody would have went, this reminds me of Genesis, right? So we read that Jesus was going to a wedding. right? And I'm not going to read all this for you. I want you to read it, but I'm going to highlight a few things. So he's at a wedding with his disciples. Now that's not unusual because in Jesus' day, all right, the father of the bride would have been in charge of the wedding, much like today. In fact, in the Middle East, everything's pretty much still like this. And he just would have went around to the entire town and invited anybody to come to the wedding. Why? Well, we have a big 3 to 7 day party. A wedding party lasted 3 to 7 days. And so we would have said, come on, come on, come on, everybody come to the wedding. My daughter is getting married. I'm getting a new son. So there would have been this huge invite to anybody to come, right? And so when Jesus gets to the wedding ceremony takes place, and now they're at the party. And then it says that Jesus' mother comes to him and says to him, they have no wine. Now, maybe you and I go, well, no big deal. Why? We just get something else. Go get some Coke or Pepsi or something, right? Well, here's the problem. You only have wine and water. Wine and water. Wine and water. Wine and water. When you order a drink, you get wine or water. So all that's left is water. And I just be honest with you, unless it's an outdoor barbecue, and even then we're going to struggle, water's not going to keep the party going, is it? So here's the big dilemma. Jesus' mother introduces a situation where the wedding party is going to cease. And one of the beauties of John's gospel is when he writes, this is always about that. Okay, something that is said is always about something in a bigger context. All right, now remember, who is the groom to the nation of Israel? It's God, right? Jesus has come, and John introduces Jesus as united with God, as one with God in the Trinity, right? 3 persons, one essence, right? And so Jesus, the groom, is now invited to save a physical wedding on earth. Now, don't miss this. This is so awesome. All right? Jesus, God, is invited to save a physical wedding on earth. Is there another wedding that Jesus is invited to save? Well, yeah, us, right? The the church becomes the bridegroom of Christ. All right. We become the bridegroom of Christ. So this is like a microcosm of what Jesus is doing in a bigger sense. So where Jesus is invited to perform a miracle and save the wedding, and now it's just we ran out of wine to keep the wedding party going. Jesus has been invited to come and what? Rescue the bride to keep the wedding going. How awesome is this foreshadowing? And all again, when you read the Gospel of John, the cross and the redemption, the blood sacrifice of Jesus is always in the foreshadowing in the background. In both places, you have the foreshadowing in the background. The cross and blood sacrifice of Jesus is always present. So Jesus makes this interesting statement. If you're going, you may be stretching it a little bit, right? Well, this is what Jesus says to her, woman. And it's not a derogatory term. It's not something evil. In fact, I jokingly say this to my wife. Again, the tone of voice here is probably a key, crucial way to read this. But in Jesus' day, woman, what does this have to do with me? And then he says this key phrase, my hour has not yet come. Now, when do we see Jesus speak about his hour coming? Well, we see it at the Last Supper, right? And we see it on the cross, knowing that he had completed all things, right? And so the hour has not yet come is a clue that something amazing and big is about to happen. The hour has not come. He says that at the Last Supper. All right, hey, that the time has come. My hour has come. The hour for the sacrifice has come. And so to some degree, what Jesus is saying is, hey, when I perform this first miracle, the clock begins ticking to my march to the cross. All right. So when I do this first miracle, the clock has now, you've got 3 years, Jesus, and then you're going to die on the cross. And so he's saying, my hour has not yet come, but it is his mother and the desire to save the wedding. Again, think about the wedding, both microcosm, this immediate wedding, that's a mini picture of what Jesus is doing for us for eternity. He's going to save the wedding, right? We're going to come back to something there. All right. So my hour has not come. And then mom leaves, Mary leaves, saying to the servants, do whatever he says. Now, they're not going to run down to Kmart and get wine, okay? They're not going to go to Kroger or wherever you might get wine. All right, there's no wine. In fact, again, it's a 3 to 7 day party. So the father of the bride has been saving up for years for this and now is going to look like a fool. Why? Because it's a honor shame culture. In the Middle East, it's still much like this honor shame culture. And that the fact that the father is forever going to be shamed after this moment. Why? Because he couldn't care for his daughter and his new son-in-law on the very most important day of their life, and therefore one of the most important days of his life, which is the wedding. The father could not provide for the wedding. The father could not provide for the wedding. Again, see the microcosm problem and see the bigger problem. The father could not take care of everything that needed to happen so the wedding could take place. So what does God do? He says, I'm going to become human. And the incarnation, that's the word we use to describe Jesus becoming human. And I will pay the sacrifice so that the bride can be bought back from sin and the wedding can take place. And so Jesus, all right, and again, we have this amazing God who chooses to leave the kingdom of heaven, become human, and die for us. So Jesus gives his life voluntarily upon the cross to save the honor of the Father. To save the honor of the Father. Don't miss the beauty that Jesus here is saving the honor of the Father by going to fix the wine problem. But in the end, it's going to save the honor of the Father by fixing the salvation problem, right? And so they go get these big purification containers or jars. They hold about 30 gallons each. By the way, that's a lot of water. Like, hey, 4 guys are going to move this, right? And so Jesus says, go fill those with water. Okay. And so they bring those back to Jesus. And then Jesus says, draw a cup out. And so one of the servants draws a cup out and Jesus says, take it to the head server, the head waiter, and they take it to the head waiter and he sips it. All right. And the head waiter tastes it and the water had become wine. Now pause. This is a place where some people would go, see, this is stupid. Miracles can't happen, right? Well, pause without going too long into this, and we've done other videos on can miracles happen. Let's just say this, all right? If creation happened, so if you're watching this video right now because creation happened, we know that what? In the beginning there was nothing, and then the Big Bang happened, and we believe in the Big Bang. We just know who banged it. It's not. It's the scientific way to explain what happened in Genesis, right? God spoke and it happened, right? And we can again go back into science and say, well, the law of cause and effect says something had to cause that to happen, and if the cause happened from nothing, whatever caused the something to happen before time, space, and matter has to be outside time, space, and matter. And so the biggest miracle of all is the creation story, right? And so we know that miracles can happen. Why? Because you and I are here and the biggest miracle of all already happened, right? And if a God can, what? Take nothing and make everything, then water into wine is not really that big a deal, right? So we have no real good argument against miracles, and therefore we can trust that the story of Jesus is, hey, at least the miracle part doesn't say that it's wrong. And again, we could go into the historical reliability of John and all that stuff. We're not doing that today, all right? So the head waiter then says, well, why, every other party, all right, the the best wine is served first. Why? Well, that way everybody's drunk, and then the watered down cheap stuff is served last, but nobody cares because they're already drunk, right? He says, why are we saving the best till last? Yeah. Again, the microcosm is, hey, we have a story about wine, and the wedding is saved by bringing the best last. The bigger picture is the prophets and all that were important. Everything that came before was important, but now the best has come. The salvation for the wedding, the best has come, and it's Jesus, right? And then he ends this section in verse 11 by saying, this beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Why? Well, but the entire Gospel of John is written so that you and I could believe, so that you and I would believe. John says, I was there, I was an eyewitness, I'm writing this so that you may believe. So today I want to challenge you. If you feel unloved, I want to remind you, read John chapter 2. Why? Because the bridegroom has come to save you. to rescue the wedding, to save the dignity of the Father, and to prepare the way for you to be reunited with God relationally in heaven. Have a great day, guys. Bye.